Right, in this lesson, we're going to go over factoring quadratic polynomials. So this is Module 9, Lesson 6 for my students. And this is still our Florida benchmark AR 1.7, which is to rewrite a polynomial expression as a product of polynomials over the real number system. So what is a quadratic polynomial? A quadratic polynomial is a polynomial that has a degree of 2. So remember, that's when our base, our variable, has an exponent of 2. So examples of quadratic polynomials are x squared minus 1 or x squared plus 2x plus 1. Standard form of a quadratic polynomial is ax squared plus bx plus c. That means that, remember, our standard form of a polynomial means that our highest exponent is always listed first, and then our constant would be last. So here we have ax squared, so the coefficient to the x squared term is our a. Our c is always going to be constant, so the number by itself. So if we're looking here at these previous examples, our a here would be equal to 1. Our b is equal to 0 because we don't have a term that has just an x by itself. And our c is equal to negative 1 because that's our constant. If we're looking at this quadratic polynomial here, our a here is still 1, our b is equal to 2, and our c is equal to 1. So a prime polynomial is a polynomial that cannot be factored. And there will be times that you'll have a polynomial that cannot be factored. And an example of a prime polynomial, is 5x squared minus 24. There's nothing we can factor out. There's not a GCF, and these are not perfect squares, so there's nothing that can be factored. So just know that when you are trying to factor something, if it doesn't work, it might be a prime polynomial. Okay, so steps to factoring a quadratic trinomial when a is equal to 1. So our a term has to be equal to 1 in this example. And so here we need to identify our b and our c term. So our b is equal to 6, our c is equal to 8. And our second step is going to be to list the factors of c. So what are all of the factors of 8 that will add together to give us our b, 6? So if c is negative, one factor must be negative, something to keep in mind. Okay, so we're going to use this factor tree in order to factor 8. So what are all the, not a factor tree, sorry, a t-chart to find all the factors of 8. So we have 1 and 8, 2 and 4. So 1 plus 8 is equal to 9. 2 plus 4 is equal to 6. So which one of these gives us our b term of 6? Well, that would be the 2 and the 4. So that's why I put it on the outside of my what I call an X puzzle. These right here that are included in your notes are just ways to help you stay organized when you're trying to find your factors. All right. Now, step 4 is to place the factors of C that add to B in the parentheses, and these are your factors. So it's going to be x plus 2, x plus 4. Okay, so if I multiplied those together, I would get x squared plus 6x plus 8. So let's try our next example. Our b here is 12x, or 12, and our c here is 27. So what are the factors of 27 that add together to give me 12? Okay, so I'm going to put 27 here over top this t-chart, and I'm going to find all the factors or numbers that multiply together to give me 27. So 1 times 27 and 3 times 9. Now, when I add 1 plus 27, I get 28. And when I add 3 plus 9, I get 12. So that means my factors are 3 and 9 that multiply to give me 27 and add to give me 12. So I can factor that and write that as factored form as x plus 3 and x plus 9. And then this second example here, again, my a is still 1. This only works when my a is 1. So my b term is negative 1. My c term is negative 20. So I'm going to fill in my graphic organizer with the negative 20 up top because that's my c term, my negative 1 at the bottom because that's my b term. And now I'm going to try to find the factors of negative 20 that add together to give me a negative 1. So negative 1 and 20, negative 2 and 10, negative 4 and 5, and I have 19, 8, and 1. Well, if that's not going to work, then what about if I had 4 and negative 5? Because I have to have a negative b term. Now that will give me negative 1. So negative 5 and 4 are the two factors that will multiply to give me negative 20 and add together to give me negative 1. So I have x minus 5 and x plus 4. All right. Now, there will be times when we have an a term, and a lot of times this happens, our a term is greater than 1. If our a term is greater than 1, we're going to follow some similar steps, okay? So step 1 is going to be to identify the a, b, and c term. So here my a term is 3, my b term is negative 11, and my c term is a positive 10. Step 2 is to list the factors of a and c. So what are the factors of a times c? So we have to take a and multiply it times c, so 3 times 10. Okay. We get 30x squared. What are the factors of 30 that will add together to give me negative 11? So we have negative 1 and negative 30, because here I forgot to mention that our c term is constant. Okay. Our a times our c term is positive. And so if that's positive and our b term is negative, both factors must be negative. So negative 1 times negative 30, negative 2 times negative 15, negative 3 times negative 10, negative 5 times negative 6. Those are all the factors of 30. So the numbers that will multiply together to give you 30, positive 30, and add together to give you negative 11 are negative 5 and negative 6. Okay, so what is this box over here that I'm filling in? So in this area model, I filled in my a term, 3x squared, and I filled in my c term, positive 10. Now I'm going to use the two new terms that I found, the negative 5x and the negative 6x, okay, to fill in these two boxes. Now I have to factor out of each row and each column to see what my original factors were. So if I have 3x squared and negative 5x, I can factor out an x. If I have negative 6x and a positive 10, I can factor out a negative 2, okay? Because I can only divide 6 by 6, 2, or 3 and still get a whole number. So the only other number of those three numbers that I can divide and still get a whole number would be 2. And the reason why it's negative is because this term is negative, this is going to be negative. Okay, now I'm going to factor out a 3x. 3 is the greatest coefficient between 3 and negative 6. The smallest coefficient that I can divide into both 3 and negative 6. And then I have an x. Then I have negative 5x. So I factored out a negative 5 because negative 5 times negative 2 gives me the positive 10 that is here. So my final factors are x minus 2 and 3x minus 5. Okay, now we're going to move on to the next example. We have 2x squared plus 9x minus 35. So my a is 2, my b is 9, my c is negative 35. So I'm going to take my a term 2, multiply that times my negative 35. Actually, I'm going to fill in my area model first with my a and c term. So a is 2x squared and c is negative 35. So that goes into my area model first. Now I'm going to do the 2 times the negative 35, and I get negative 70x squared. Okay, a times c. Down here in the bottom, I'm going to put my positive 9 because that's my b term. Now, what are the factors of negative 70 that are going to add together to give me a positive 9? So we're going to have negative 1 times 70, negative 2 times 35, negative 5 times 14. Here you'll notice that negative 5 and positive 14 add together to give me the positive 9. So those are the two factors that I'm going to put here in my cross puzzle, is what I call it. And those are the two factors I'm going to fill in my area model. So I have negative 5x and a 14x. So if I have 2x squared and 14x, looking at this column first, 2x squared and negative 5x, I'm going to factor out the x first. Okay, There's nothing that I can divide into 2 and negative 5 and factor out. So now I'm looking at 14 and negative 35. What can I factor out of these two numbers? Well, that would be a positive 7 because I can divide 14 by 7 and I can divide 35 by 7. Here I'm going to factor out a 2x and a negative 5. I can always double check my work because does 2x times x give me 2x squared? Yes. Does 2x times 7 give me 14x? Yes. Negative 5 times x gives me negative 5x, and negative 5 times 7 gives me negative 35. So I end up with x plus 7 and 2x minus 5. Okay, next I have 4x squared minus 23x minus 6. I'm going to identify my a, b, and c terms. I'm going to fill in my area model with my 4x squared and my negative 6. I'm going to use a times c, so 4 times negative 6 is negative 24, x squared. My b term is negative 23x. So what two numbers multiply together to give me negative 24, but add together to give me negative 23? Well, here, because my b term is negative, my larger number of my factors is going to be the negative term. So 1 and negative 24 gives me the negative 23. So these two boxes I'm going to fill in with 1x and negative 24x. So looking at this column, what can I factor out of 4x squared and negative 24x? Well, I can factor out a 4x. What can I factor out of 1x and negative 6? The only thing I can factor out here is a positive 1. Okay, now I have 4x squared and x. The only thing I can factor out of this row is an x. Then I have negative 24x and negative 6. I can factor out a negative 6. Now take a moment to double check that you factored out correctly. Does x times 4x give you 4x squared? Does x times 1 give you 1x? Does negative 6 times 4x give you negative 24x? Yes. And then does negative 6 times 1 give you a negative 6? Yes. Everything checks out. So that means that my factors are 4x plus 1 and x minus 6. All right. Sometimes you'll need to look for a GCF or greatest common factor before you start factoring. So remember, that's what we learned in our previous lesson, is to look for a GCF. Now, the good news is once you have a GCF, it's easier to factor. So if I have 3x squared minus 3x minus 6, my GCF is 3. So I'm going to factor that out. So I'm going to divide all those terms by 3, and I end up getting x squared minus x minus 2. So my a is now equal to 1, my b is equal to negative 1, my c is equal to negative 2. So now I'm going to find the factors of negative 2 that add together to give me negative 1. And I know that that's negative 2 and 1. So when I fill in my area model, I know that I'm going to have x minus 2 and x plus 1. And this 3 that I factored out in the beginning, my GCF, is going to be in front of those two parentheses. Okay, let's try this one more time with number 4. I have 2x squared plus 18x plus 28. First, we're going to look, is there a GCF? And yes, I can divide all terms by 2. So when I factor out the 2, I'm left with x squared plus 9x plus 14. So my a is equal to 1, my b is equal to 9, my c is equal to 14. So what two numbers multiply together to give me 14 and add together to give me 9? Well, that's going to be 7 and 2. So my factors are going to be x minus 2 and x plus 7. That's a 7. Actually, those are both wrong. So this should be, and I'll write it in here. Oops. I think I changed these and didn't put it. So this should be x plus 7, x plus 2. And that would be your final answer for that problem. All right, that's it.